Okay, so I think we're all good to go now. So I want to say hello to everybody watching today. We're excited to have Katherine Firkin joining us today. So Katherine's a Melbourne journalist, currently with CBS New York. She has over a decade of experience and has worked across every medium: print, online, TV, and radio. Katherine began her career at the Herald Sun newspaper, where she specialised in sports reporting before moving to breaking news, including crime and court reporting. During this time, she covered some of Victoria's most notorious criminal affairs, including the death and funeral of underworld figure Carl Williams. She has also worked for Seven West Media, 3AW Radio, the Nine Networks Today Show, and Network 10, and has been a regular international correspondent for multiple global outlets. Katherine has been writing fiction from a young age, and she studied literature and journalism at university. Her debut novel, Sticks and Stones, was inspired by the many criminal trials she has covered. So thanks so much. Certainly an impressive list of things you've done. And want to tell everyone I've just recently read The Girl Remains and really, really loved it. I haven't read any of your books before, and I gave it a 5 out of 5. So yeah, a really, really great read. So thanks so much for joining us. Also, people watching, just want to let you know that thanks to Penguin, I have some books to give away of The Girl Remains. So please ask some questions during the Facebook Live and you'll have a chance to win. So Katherine, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself or maybe your books?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for giving me a 5-star review on this one. I'm super excited about The Girl Remains. It's my second novel. My first novel, Sticks and Stones, came out last year, sort of right in the middle of when the pandemic struck. So I wasn't really able to do a lot of these sort of book events, even even the virtual events. Things really changed overnight. So this is my new little baby, The Girl Remains. It's a crime thriller that's set in Victoria in Australia on the Mornington Peninsula in a very small little coastal town called Blairgowrie. Now, it's all about a cold case that happened back in 1998. 3 teenage girls go out one night, but only 2 of them come back. And this sparks one of the most baffling cases in Australia's history. Just what happened to this 15-year-old girl who effectively disappeared into the night. It's really frustrating and confusing for police because when the 2 girls come back, they really can't tell detectives what happened. They're quite confused. They think they heard noises. They think someone might have been out there with them, but they're really not sure. And so unfortunately for the detectives at the time, the leads on this case really dry up and the investigation is left cold for almost 2 decades. Then in the present day, human remains are found on a beach in the same location where this girl disappeared, and this causes the investigation to get reopened.
And we've already got some people asking questions, which is great. Anne's wondering, is it based on any fact at all?
That's a really good question. My background is as a journalist, so I've worked in plenty of different mediums, but largely I've been working across crime and court reporting. And I certainly did try to keep this realistic. It is a completely fictional story, but it is a police procedural. So that means you will actually see how detectives turn up and what they do and what techniques they use. And for that part of it, I did do a lot of research, and I did look at one particular case that was on the Mornington Peninsula, which was a very famous case in Australia, at least, about a little 6-year-old girl called Cherie Beasley who went missing. And I actually spoke to a lead detective in that case.
Okay.
To get information on what police would have done at the time, how they would have gone about things. Of course, 1998 doesn't sound that long ago, but things were very different. There were no mobile phones. There was not a lot of security footage. So what did police do to try and actually, work out what happened to this little girl back in 1991 was the real life case. And then my case is set in 98. And I certainly did use a lot of what the detective told me to inform the writing of this book.
Yeah, and I have to say it really sounded very realistic and as if it could be a real case. So yeah, I'm not surprised with Anne's question. And the setting is that Blairgowrie it was, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Um, is that a place that's familiar to you? And
Yeah, so I've spent most of my life in Victoria. Most recently I've actually been living in New York the last couple of years, working over
mm,
there. But Blairgowrie is a little coastal town that I was lucky enough to have a friend at primary school whose parents had a little beach shack down there. So we spent lots of childhood summers down there. And then when we became teenagers, it was sort of the first place we were allowed to go without parents.
mm,
And I think that really, was the spark for this story because, when you're 14, 15, that sort of age, and you finally get rid of the parents
mm,
and you go and have a bit of fun, it just feels like there's this world that's awaiting you and anything could happen. And that's sort of the feeling that my characters have that night when they head out. Of course, unfortunately, things go terribly wrong. But in their minds, when they head out, it's just this world of possibility.
mm. And did you have any scary moments like that there?
Well, I was such a chicken when I was a child and a teenager that, I used to get a fright if I saw the trees moving and things. So it's sort of funny for me now to be writing crime because, back then I was probably the biggest chicken out of all my friends.
Mm.
I'd be the one going, oh, we should go back, we should go home. I was probably the slightly nerdier, quiet one. But it's nice to imagine what I might have done if I was a bit more wild.
Mm. And Mary said she really loved your first book and she listened to it on audio and it reminded her of Underbelly, which she really enjoyed.
Oh, that's great. I actually haven't listened to the audio version, but I did get an actor from Sydney who's worked in a lot of those sort of crime
Mm,
TV shows to do it. And I think he did such a good job. I've only heard samples, but from what I heard, it felt like he really brought the story to life. So that's really lovely that you've enjoyed it, Mary. And hopefully you enjoy this one. It is the same detective, but it is set in a slightly different location.
mm. So, what location is the first one set on?
The first one is very urban. It's set right in the heart of Melbourne. So it's
Okay.
all very, gritty and sort of
Mm,
around the docklands in the harbour sort of area. Lots of under the bridges, by the train
mm,
stations. It's a different feel. This one is much more your small coastal town sort of setting.
mm. And could you tell us a little bit about how you became a writer? Like, is it something you'd always wanted to do? And
Yeah, it's really funny for me. Since I was young, like the youngest sort of memory I have is I wanted to write. I always loved reading. I was lucky enough to be in households where both my parents, although they were separated, really supported reading and they loved books and all that sort of stuff. And it was the one thing that I think I really it just came quite naturally to me. I wanted to write. I loved reading. It was all sort of there. But it took me a lot longer than I expected. I always had these visions that in my early 20s I'd be published and everything would be fabulous. And I wrote quite a few manuscripts more along the commercial fiction side,
mm,
and they were just terrible. I don't know. I never showed them to anyone,
mm,
but I just knew they were really awful. And I actually kind of gave up on it for quite a while and just focused on being a journalist. And it only really came back to me, yeah, sort of late 20s when I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this another crack. And even then, it still took me a good 5 years to get Sticks and Stones written. So it's been a
mm,
long process.
mm. And how hard or easy was it to actually get that first book published?
It's interesting. I was very strategic about it. I'd heard all these horror stories about sending your manuscript out to publishers and just getting it left in the slush pile. And I thought,
Mm,
the one thing I've learned in media is you're much better to meet people in person and try to make connections. So I spent a lot of time trying to find events where I would meet people, either publishers or agents, so I could actually talk to them and find out what they were looking for and if they were the right fit for me. And I was lucky enough to meet an agent rather than a publisher who liked what I'd done. And through her, we then submitted to publishers. But even then, it wasn't that easy. Like, I still got lots of rejections. I got
mm,
lots of people who were sort of on the fence about it. And then I was lucky enough that Penguin sort of fell in love with the whole concept.
mm, mm. And Kate's asked if you need to read the first one or are they standalone. I'd like to say that I read The Girl Remains without reading the first one and didn't feel like I'd missed anything by doing that.
Yeah, deliberately made it that you can absolutely read it just standalone. And in fact, I mean, I know a lot of people that have picked up The Girl Remains already and they haven't read Sticks and Stones and they seem to, completely love it. If you have read Sticks and Stones first, I think the only thing you see the progression of the detective and his life sort of move on. But I was very careful to make sure that you don't miss anything. You shouldn't be feeling left out if you just jump in and read The Girl Remains.
Kelly says the Cherie Beasley disappearance book was great, and I know the Blair Gary area, so I must read this book. And she wants to know what first interested you to write in this genre.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like I was saying, when I wanted to be a writer, I never imagined I would write crime. I really genuinely was a scaredy cat. And I really sort of thought I'd end up writing sort of lighter, sort of summer beach type reads. But being a journalist, I sort of got pushed into the whole crime court reporting a little bit involuntarily actually at the start. And then I fell in love with it. And I think what I love about crime now is that you get to really play with the different extremes of human emotion because you're dealing with something that's so huge, like a murder or some terrible crime generally. You really get to look at human sort of the deep, dark wells of human psychology, the people who pretend to be one thing and then go on and lead these really dark lives outside of ours. I'm fascinated by duplicity and deception and those sort of criminals who quite often have normal lives. They appear to have normal lives and then they're sort of doing all these terrible things behind the scenes. And I find people like that obviously scary, but also quite fascinating. Like, how do you get to that point where you can just compartmentalize your life in such a way?
And will we see more books with the same detective again?
I think we will. I mean, my intention was always that it would continue on. Having said that, I'm right in the middle of what I think will be the third book, the third manuscript, and it is completely different. It's actually a standalone psychological thriller, and it's all told from one perspective. Both my first two novels are told from multiple perspectives, so you do get inside different characters' heads, which I really like. But book three is a little bit different, and it's all told from this one woman's perspective. And again, the setting's a bit different. I won't say too much about it yet, but I'm really excited about it, but it is very different.
But still crime?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crime.
Yeah. No, this sounds good. And are you just starting off with that at the moment? How far along are you?
Probably about halfway through. I find it very hard to say because I'm one of those writers, I'm very slow to start. I'm not a big plotter initially. I always have images in my head, but I don't map everything out. So I tend to work out how I'm writing and my progress just through writing. When I get about halfway, it tends to get a lot faster because then I know I sort of have a better idea of where we're going.
And what do you start off with when you first start a new novel?
I always start with sort of the big opening scene, whatever that is. So in The Girl Remains, straight away we see these three girls heading out at night and we straight away see there's a little bit of tension between them. It's dark. They're a bit nervous, particularly one of them is a bit nervous about heading out and something goes wrong. I always try to start with that first, that first big scene that's going to get you sort of thinking, oh, what's happening here? With book three, that big scene is a little bit different because it's a bit of a twist on what you're thinking you're reading. But it's always that first moment to try to get the reader into it and also for me to really establish sort of the setting and who the important characters are.
Yeah. Kate says she knows Kristen White has spoken quite a bit about the Australian crime writers movement that's really taken off in the past few years. Do you feel connected to that as you've been living overseas? And do you have any writers that you're inspired by?
Gee, that's a really good question, and it's very observant of you, Kate, because you're right. There has been a huge sort of boom in Australian crime writing, and even just myself. I mean, I grew up reading a lot of Scandi sort of crime when I really got into my crime, and I loved Scandi crime, and I've been really impressed since releasing Sticks and Stones. I've made a huge effort to read Australian crime and to support Australian authors. And I have been really, really impressed with the quality of it. I mean, in my mind,
Mm,
it's as good, if not better, than a lot of the big US names that are coming out at the
mm,
moment.
mm,
And certainly on par with the UK stuff, it's really fantastic to see. Truthfully though, yeah, I have felt a bit disconnected. It's a weird time with the pandemic. I've been physically isolated, and then being
mm.
overseas, launching my first book almost completely remotely. I only did my very first in-person event. I think it was 2 days ago,
Oh,
where
okay.
I
Wow.
finally met
Yeah.
another author in person.
Mm,
So yeah, I do feel disconnected. But
mm,
having said that, there's a really lovely online sort of support group from Australian authors. A lot of people I haven't even really met or even necessarily read have sort of reached out to me and said,
mm,
you know, you're a debut author. It's a tough time to have your debut come out. This was last year, obviously. Let us know if you need anything. It's a very supportive little community. Um, and certainly people like Candice Fox, Dervla McTiernan, obviously Jane
mm,
Harper,
mm,
those sort of particularly women for me are leading the way. And it's
mm.
really wonderful to feel like they're sort of paving the path for me.
Yeah, yeah, there certainly are some great Australian crime writers. Mm. Kelly is wondering if you're contracted to write with your next novel.
I'm not. I have constant conversations with Penguin, and I'm pretty confident it's all going to be fine. I mean, their conversations with me are very open that, you know, we're continuing, but for different reasons, I haven't actually signed more than a one book deal.
Mm,
For me, it was also largely because I knew my next book was going to be quite different.
yeah.
I wanted to keep my own options open, and I think probably they did too.
Mm,
It's not uncommon to only write one book at a time initially, and it does offer me a little bit of flexibility in terms of what I do with the manuscript.
mm, that's interesting, yeah.
Mm.
Patricia is wondering what you enjoy reading, and I'm also wondering if maybe there's something you've been reading lately that you'd like to recommend to us.
Well, I just finished reading The Chase by Candice Fox. That's her new one.
Mm,
That was really I found that really incredible. It's almost like like you're sort of reading one of those big Hollywood blockbusters. It's such a big themed book that she's written. It's amazing. Like as soon as you get into it, you're into it.
mm,
It's sort of this, you know, big prison escape where all the prisoners come out and you're sort of trying to work out who's orchestrated it and what was their motive behind it. I am right in the middle of writing my third manuscript though, and I'll tell you something. I don't know if it's just me and my insecurities, but I find it really hard to read crime when I'm writing crime.
yeah, we've
I
had a
just,
few authors mention,
yeah,
yeah.
I just compare
Mm,
myself constantly.
mm,
I keep thinking, oh, I should have done that, or, you know, I almost overanalyze it. So after I finished The Chase, I've actually been reading a lot of nonfiction recently. I just finished Emotional Female, which was, you know, about sort of the sexism in the ranks of surgeons and things like
mm,
that.
okay.
And I like switching gears a bit when I'm writing and reading something a bit different, just also so that I'm not almost picking up other people's ideas by osmosis.
Mm, mm.
Hmm.
And could you tell us, sorry, what I lost my train of thought for a minute. So, do you have writing rituals?
No, not really. I mean, I definitely write better in the morning. In an ideal world, I would get up every morning at, I don't know, probably 5 8ish and
Mm,
sit down and write for a few hours. But with my job as a journo, like lots of jobs, it's not a 9 to 5 job. It's not a Monday to Friday job.
mm,
Especially while I've been living in the US, you know, I'll be based in New York, but suddenly something happens in Washington and I'm on a train and I'm over there. And
mm,
with the time difference, I might be doing a live cross into Australia at like 2 or 3 a.m.
mm,
I just can't necessarily get into a great um, rhythm. Having said that, you know, I have got really good at just sort of zooming in and focusing whenever I can. And I have learnt that I write a lot better when I give myself compact time. So if I lock myself away in a room for 2 weeks and just write for 12 hours a day, I do better than trying to do a little bit here and there. I tend to lose my train of thought.
Yeah.
So that's probably the only thing I've learned, is that I need to 100% give myself time when I'm really into it.
And what about your research? Could you tell us a little bit about how you go about your research? And
Yeah, I mean, most of my research, and I did have to do quite a bit with The Girl Remains. I'm a big fan of talking to people, so I always try to get someone in that industry or whatever I'm trying to research, a detective, and actually speak to them. I try not to do the Google sort of rabbit hole researching, because one, it takes up a lot of time and you do go down these rabbit holes and you can sort of kid yourself that you're working when really you're just getting distracted by a whole lot of things. But also when you're speaking to someone, I find it a lot of the time it sparks ideas and you can sort of pick up different threads that you can't necessarily do when you're reading a book or looking online. So for instance, The Girl Remains does focus on a bit of forensic anthropology in terms of how they identify the bones that are found on the beach and what sort of clues they can get out of that. And I did actually go and speak to a forensic anthropologist about that, someone who had actually worked at the World Trade Center after September 11, which was, of course, I mean, I can't even imagine the sights that they saw, but they were so experienced and they were able to give me a few suggestions about what I could sort of incorporate in the story that would help police to identify who this person was. And that was really handy. And we talked through different ways and techniques and how technology has changed. If you're, I always recommend trying to get a hold of someone and actually having a chat if you can. It makes a big difference.
Yeah. And what's the most surprising thing that you've found when you've been doing research for your novels?
Particularly on the police side of things, I'm actually quite surprised how often police will push the boundaries of the law in terms of trying to get that evidence that they need. A lot of police are so motivated to catch the offender because they've seen some things that are just shocking. When they know someone's done it and they can't quite crack them, I find it interesting how far they will go personally to try to get that person and how much it means to them. And I think you just see that a little bit of that in the book. They do some slightly unconventional things to try and get the person they think is responsible to crack.
And Kate's wondering what other things you like doing outside of your work and your reading.
I wish I had outside at the moment. I feel like it's my entire life right now. I am obsessed with my little dogs, my little Scotty dog Morris. So Morris and I spend every second I have with him when I'm not writing or working. But otherwise, truthfully, right now, it's just sort of trying to catch up with friends. Post-pandemic in Australia is really wonderful just to go out and, go to a restaurant and catch up with friends, meet people in person. Coming from America, that was a very different feeling. Right now, I'm just making the most of actually getting to see people and get out and enjoy a bit of freedom.
Yeah. How long have you been back in Australia for?
I've only been back about almost 4 weeks. So
Not very long at all.
I had to do the 2-week quarantine course. Very different to other countries. Our system here, so that was a challenge, but it was good writing time.
Yeah, I can imagine it would have been. And could you tell us, for you, what makes a good story?
I really think I think there's two different types of authors. Some authors are really plot driven, where they have those, a bit like I was saying with Candace Fox and the Chase, those fantastic big sort of wild stories, and they really drive them. And other authors, which I think is more my camp, are very character focused. And I really love my characters to be a bit complex and a bit unexpected. And I really like the characters to drive the stories. So for me, I always think of great characters and put people in situations. And I think with crime, if you are really honest about it, most crimes novels sort of revolve around someone has died or someone has been hurt, someone and then it's the backstory. So for me, I'm often more thinking about the motivation. Why has someone done this? And then I work backwards into, so what is the crime? As opposed to, here's the crime, why has someone done it?
Yeah. And Yvonne's wondering if we'll still see you on the news.
You should do. Not for a while. I've taken about a month off to enjoy being in Australia and talk about the book, and actually just to see family and friends. But then when I'm back in the States, I should be back on the news. I don't know exactly when, but it will be a while. It'll be at least 4 weeks before I'm back on TV, I think.
Okay. And could you tell us a little bit about what it was like having your debut novel during lockdown and trying to promote it and that?
Truthfully, it was a bit hard. Like, it was 5 years of sort of working towards something, and although I was lucky, I was one of the few lucky ones that my book actually did quite well, as far as people still somehow managed to find it and it sold, and I got another contract with Penguin, which is great. I sort of felt like I missed out on a bit, which is probably a silly thing to say, but you work to something for so long. I really wanted a book launch. Like, I just wanted to have all the people in the room that had helped me, have a drink with them, say thank you, to feel all that. And instead, I launched my book in the kitchen in my PJs, talking to a screen by myself, and it's just not the same. So I think it was less that I couldn't promote it, because Penguin did a great job, and I don't know, I got lucky. People still seem to pick it up, and not every debut author that happened for. But I really didn't feel like I got the author experience. I didn't meet other authors. I didn't do any panels. I didn't get to meet any readers. I think I only went to about 3 bookstores before everything shut down. So I didn't even really get to see the book on the shelf. It was sort of, it was a bit surreal. It's a bit of a weird experience.
Yeah. And were you able to do any book launch for The Girl Remains?
I was a little bit reluctant to lock a proper launch in, even though I would have loved to, purely because I was coming in from the States. I had quarantine. Sometimes quarantine gets extended depending on the situation. So I have kept it very low key, but I have been able to do a few in-person events, which is amazing. And honestly, just to go to see it in the bookstore this time feels amazing.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Step up. Hopefully by book 3, I could actually have a launch and say thank you all those people.
Yeah, well, I hope you do get to be able to do that. Just reminding people as well, before we finish off, if you do have any more questions for Katherine, please type them in comments, and if you do, you'll have a chance to win a copy of The Girl Remains. While we wait to see if there's any more questions, can you tell people how they can keep in touch with what's going on with your writing?
Yeah, the best way is on sort of social media channels like Instagram, Twitter. I've got a Facebook page as well. I do have a website, but I'm pretty poor at keeping that updated, to be honest. I need to get better at that. So the best way is Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Otherwise, through the Penguin website, they are constantly keeping people updated about what I'm doing. And I really do like it when people, message me. If you have questions about writing, or you've read the book and you want to tell me what you thought of it, I really like getting messages from people. Feel free to send me a message or tag me in photos or things. It's really nice.
And Kelly's wondering how close the release dates were between your 2 books.
It was a very quick turnaround. So Sticks and Stones came out in June 2020. And The Girl Remains has just come out May 4, 2021. So
yeah, that's very quick, yeah.
Yeah, it was a furious few months of re-editing this one. But I had already sort of written it during that 5-year wait with Sticks and Stones. So it still took me quite a while, but they really wanted to try and get the next one out to build a little bit, given that we couldn't do all the promotion we wanted for the first one.
Yeah. And another question I'm wondering is reviews. Do you look at all your reviews?
I'm pretty good at not looking at all. It's really funny. You know, when you work in the media, I'm sure this is not a surprise to people. You get a lot of feedback all the time. You
Yeah.
know, people, and a lot of it's not positive. You know, like people are more likely to tell you what they don't like than what they do like.
Mm,
And I've been called all sorts of names under the sun as
mm,
a journalist, and that doesn't bother me. I'm so used to it. But when my book came out, the first one, I was surprised by how personal it felt and how vulnerable I felt. And I did find it hard initially. I mean, most of the feedback was wonderful, but you do get people, and you're always going to get people who don't like what you do for
mm,
different reasons. And I found that a little bit tough. So I sort of made a rule for myself, pretty much not to read anything, good, bad, or otherwise. If people contact me directly, that's different.
mm.
But I don't read reviews. I don't look on Goodreads. I put one thing up when the book launches just to say thanks everyone for reading, and then I kind of walk away and I don't look at it again. I just find it easier that way, you know. And
Yeah.
if you don't get too excited by the good reviews, you don't get too devastated by the bad ones.
Mm, mm. And Anne's wondering how long we might need to wait to see your next book.
This depends how fast I can work. If I can actually get myself settled here for a few weeks, I should have the third book finished by the end of this month, and then it's up to Penguin. I think they will want to release it next year, but
Mm,
I don't know. It's an interesting process. It's
mm,
surprised me how slow it is. You know, once you hand the book in, it's still usually a good year before it's ready to come out.
yeah. Mm,
So I think the earliest will be about this time next year.
next year, yeah.
But yeah, we'll see.
Mm. All right, thank you very much. And looking forward to reading more of your books. As I said, really loved The Girl Remains, and it was 5 out of 5 from me. And thanks everybody who joined in tonight and the questions that we got. We got some good questions. Thank you very much, Katherine. Hope
No,
I have a
thank you.
chance to maybe talk to you again when you have a new book out.
I hope so. And thanks to everyone who tunes in. It really does mean a lot.
Yeah, thanks, and bye everybody.